All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on their trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Kelley Gunter. Kelley, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So Kelley is a survivor, an emotional warrior, a connoisseur of comfort food, and the author of You Have Such a Pretty Face. Her painful journey to find peace and self-worth began with a 243-pound weight loss that included many dark moments of despair, which eventually brought her to her knees. Broken and devastated in the aftermath of her own self-destruction, her fractured faith screamed out that somehow she still had a faint pulse and her shattered heart was in fact still beating. Following a lengthy career in social services, Kelley began writing full-time. Her book, You Have Such a Pretty Face, is a memoir detailing the emotional journey of being obese and the surprising changes brought on by her extreme weight loss following bariatric surgery, as well as the emotional factors that contributed to her initial weight gain. Kelley, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
All right, before we go in here, share with the listeners where you're from originally. And
Troy, Ohio.
Okay,
yeah.
Where you are currently.
I'm still in Troy.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So Kelley, let's jump in here. How the heck did all this happen?
Yeah. So my story, my weight gain, all of that is sort of the cumulative effect of trauma that was never spoken about, never allowed to heal, never acknowledged in any way. And so as a little girl, I grew up in a house where I was sexually abused by my two older teenage brothers. And that abuse started around 7 or 8. Oh and God. So that went until I was 14 when they ultimately moved out of the home. And so as a result, I tried to tell one time and tell my mom.
Okay.
And apparently she didn't understand exactly what I was trying to say to her. I was a little girl. I didn't have the words to accurately convey exactly what had happened. And so she said something, though, because immediately I was raped again, and it was more brutal. The threats were more intimidating. And what I learned from that was, I'm never going to tell anyone ever again what I'm going through. Mm-hmm. And so it just turned into a life of trying to survive the unthinkable. How many rape victims have to have breakfast in the morning with the person who raped them the night before? Mm-hmm. How many rape victims have to hand their rapist a Christmas present? And yet that's the truth for survivors who were sexually abused in their own home by family members. And so what that did was give me an incredibly skewed idea of what love was. And so the way that I found comfort, initially, I just had this push to prove that I was worthy, even though I felt so worthless. I'm certain people think, oh, well, you have low self-esteem. You were a victim of sexual abuse. I had no self-esteem. And I was from a middle-class family. No one thought, oh, what's going on in that house? So I became very, very good at putting on a front of being this happy person. When I first wrote my book and I spoke to people who knew me as a child, they said, oh, you were such a ray of sunshine. You were so happy. And how could I be? How could I be that happy? Mm-hmm. You know, they said, you just had these big brown eyes and you were so full of joy. But who came to the aid of the little girl with the big brown eyes? And the truth of that was no one. And so I had this push to prove I was worthy. I graduated 4th in my class. I was a 4-point student. I, was a cheerleader, an athlete. I was all these things because I was trying so hard to prove to the world, hey, if I have all these accolades, then I can find my worth. And so as I got into college, though, I began to really pile on the weight. And so by the time
let me hold it one if I may. So you said this started when you were 7 and went on for about 7 years.
Yes.
And you told your mom once, so during this process, how you said you just tried to be a ray of sunshine and you tried to prove your worth.
Yeah. I didn't try to be a ray of sunshine. People just remember me that way.
Okay. Excuse me. First of all, look, coming on here and talking about your story is incredibly courageous. So I honor that. It's just, I mean, this is a horrific story. It is. There's no two ways about it. How do you manage this? Do you just compartmentalize it?
Interestingly enough, yes, there was a lot of compartmentalizing going on and a lot of survival skills that I developed. I became a very, very good liar. If I went to school, if I said, oh, I'm sick, then they would send me home. And my mom owned a business, so she was at work. But if she came and got me, I was too young to stay home by myself. So she'd take me to work with her and I could avoid being raped in the afternoon. So developing these skills as a little girl, how can I possibly avoid this? I mean, I had 2 brothers, so sometimes the abuse was twice a day. And so learning to try to manipulate my environment and get through those situations, terrifying situations. I could never go to bed at night without staring at the doorknob, hoping that it wouldn't turn, but it always did. And so those are things that I didn't know. Does this happen to everybody? As I was going through elementary school, I can remember looking at other girls and thinking, does this happen to her? I didn't know. At a certain point, as I got older, I knew what's going on in my home isn't right, but I couldn't speak a word of it. And that shame and that silence controlled me for several decades.
Okay, so you started to talk about the eating.
Right.
Continue, please.
Yeah. So by the time that I received my bachelor's in sociology, I went on and got a master's in clinical counseling. And because, I couldn't heal myself, but I was going to try to heal everybody else. And that, what I wouldn't do was ever focus on what happened to me. And I never spoke about it, even getting a master's degree in a program that obviously talked about abuse. I learned about abuse. I'm licensed. A lot of the seminars that you go to for your continuing education, those are topics that they talk about, but it never infiltrated me. I thought I have this trauma sitting on this invisible shelf in my life, the dangerous safety of denial. And I thought I'm not a victim anymore. And because it's there, but unfortunately, what I grew to learn was that unhealed trauma will sit in the control room of your soul, quietly dictating most of your life's calamities, maybe not all, but so by the time I was in my mid to late 20s, I was over 300 pounds. And it wasn't
up until
long.
This point, had you seen a therapist at all?
No.
Had you said, had you thought about, I need some help? Okay.
No.
Okay. So,
and you're still having a relationship in my family. I think it's important to say that so many people still have relationships with their abusers because that's what they knew. That was the only thing they knew. That was their family. My oldest brother, I was terrified of him my entire life because he had this rage disorder and just, it didn't end. The abuse ended, the trauma didn't. And so pretty soon I was 391 pounds and I stayed that way.
At what age?
By 27.
Okay.
And I stayed that way until I was 37. And that's when I decided to have weight loss surgery. And, you have a psychological for that surgery. And, they sit and they say to you, this isn't going to change your life. It's not like, if you have these issues, I knew what they were going to ask. I mean, I was a licensed therapist myself, so I knew what to say, but I thought losing this weight will give me everything I want. I thought it will help me have a successful relationship, not realizing that my view of love was so distorted from everything I had learned in my childhood. People who love you hurt you, and you take it and you go back and you continue to try to make a very unhealthy relationship work. And so at that point, I had the surgery, and actually, I mean, and I talk about this in the book, it literally, I died in recovery. I was on life support for numerous days with them telling my parents, she's not going to live through the night, make her plans. And so, but here I am 20 years later. So in 14 months, I lost 243 pounds. And I had all the extra skin removed. I've actually maintained that weight loss to this day. But what I didn't do was heal the trauma that caused me to use food as comfort in the first place. Mm-hmm. So food was my Band-Aid, but I desperately needed to talk about my wound, and I wouldn't do it. And so I developed new Band-Aids along the way, equally as destructive. And I just went from cross addiction to cross addiction, ultimately with a gambling addiction that caused me to lose everything. And I had started a company that had grown and become very successful. I ran that company for 13 years, but I misused money from that company with the gambling addiction. And so I lost it all. I lost my job. I lost my home, my cars, all my friends, everything we had. And it was at that point that I went into treatment. I was eventually convicted of theft for the misuse of those monies. And I had to restart my life. And so going into treatment, I went to the Institute of Wholeness in Sedona, Arizona. And they said when I walked in that they knew they had their hands full, because one of the board of directors of my previous company said to me the night before I left for treatment, she said, like, Kelley, I know you're a good person. I don't know what's going on with you, but when you get there, just tell them the truth. Mm-hmm. And I'd been truthful about all of it all along. My judgment and consequential thinking were so skewed that I thought, I turned in receipts for all the time that I misused the money. I thought, this is just like a payroll advance. I couldn't see the outcome of my behaviors. And so I thought to myself, I was sitting on the plane waiting to go to Sedona. And I thought about her words about just tell them the truth. And
excuse me 1 second. What were you going to Sedona for?
For a gambling addiction. So I was going for treatment for the gambling addiction. That was part of what was going on with everything with my court case and all of that. So I went to Sedona in December. And so all of this had started in November. The month between November and December has some incredibly difficult stories, one that I'll share. But that day on the plane, I just thought, I'll tell them everything, but I'm not telling them about the sexual abuse. I'd lost everything. I had nothing left to lose. The man I loved, every friend I had but one, all of our belongings, every single thing I could lose. I was publicly humiliated, and I still wasn't going to tell about the sexual abuse. So when I got there, of course, they were very suspicious that was what was the core of my situation, but I would not speak about it. And so,
and in your mind, the reason you wouldn't talk about it was why?
I just had so much shame. That's how powerful the shame around sexual abuse is. And you never have shame that you don't have silence with it. And so for all these years, I had kept that secret. I had put up this facade of, Kelley's happy, Kelley's successful, Kelley's all these things. And all of it was just a front. I was so broken on the inside. I had maybe this exterior that I had worked very hard to get healthy, but my foundation was a shambles. And so finally, though, in Sedona, eventually they were able to get me to just break down eventually. It took several days before I finally would speak of it. And that's how powerful that shame is. I sat in the director's office one day and she put a doll in front of me that was approximately 8 or 9 years old, the age of the size of a doll that would match an 8 or 9-year-old little girl. And she said, I want you to tell 8-year-old Kelley what she needed to hear. And I couldn't do it. Like literally my throat was just, I could not speak. And we sat in her office for hours. And I knew she's trying to use silence to get me to speak, because I knew that as a therapeutic technique. And I thought, I'm not doing it. Like I just wouldn't do it. And hours had passed. We'd had bathroom breaks. And finally, she said to me, Kelley, this is important. She said, you could go to jail. And I said, I'd rather go to jail than do this. And that's how powerful that shame is. And so eventually, though, they were able to get me to speak. And that is really when my healing journey began.
What did you say to the girl, the doll?
I told her that nothing was her fault and that she would be okay. And that still chokes me up today, because I think that's what so many people need to hear, is that you can make it through the darkness. You can find your way out, and you can not only survive, but you can thrive. And having that compassion for yourself is something that took me a long time to do. I've been sober now for 6 years. So that was 6 years ago. And it was a very difficult healing process. I mean, it was like a portal opened and I was inundated with flashbacks and night terrors. And that's what I came home to. I had a legal case. I desperately wanted to take responsibility for my mistakes. At the same time, I'm overwhelmed with these flashbacks, and the night terrors were really difficult. And getting through those situations and learning that I could be in a healthy vulnerability with people was a very difficult process for me, to be able to trust and to learn that I didn't have to use the survival skills that became incredibly unhealthy coping skills as an adult. And that was a long, lengthy process, and one that obviously I'll go through for the rest of my life. I mean, I don't believe we're meant to be stuck in healing, but I do think that healing is lifelong, that we have to continue to incorporate all of the things that we've learned, or else we can lose ground. And certainly I don't want to backslide. So I do think that's a forever situation.
Wow.
There was a lot of darkness in that time. And there's one story I'll share with you. Before I went to Sedona, in that month of time between when everything fell apart and I was arrested and before I went to treatment, it was a very difficult situation. Like my neighbors didn't care if I had on Gucci shoes and a Gucci belt when I was over the hood of my car getting arrested and getting handcuffs put on me, and so all the things that I had tried to build to say, look how worthy I am. Like, I can have a nice home and a nice car and I wear these kind of clothes, and all the things that I tried to get to buy worth meant nothing, absolutely nothing. And if I didn't develop that worth from the inside, but that's a lot of work and a long journey. And so in that time frame, I was in an incredibly dark place. I have one child, my son. He was in college at the time, so about 20. He was around 20 years old. And I had a very large life insurance policy that my company had purchased for me, and it went until March. And so it was several $1 million. And I thought my son would be better off without me. Like, I've ruined his life. I've ruined our life. We have, we'd lost everything. And I just was thinking that his life would be better if I wasn't in it. And that wasn't clear thinking, but, the darkness is a liar, and the darkness will convince you that very inaccurate thoughts are valid. And so I had tried to figure out, how can I end my life that it wouldn't look like I ended my life. And I could not come up with anything that was something I thought was viable. And I couldn't bring myself to do that. Mm-hmm. So I decided at that point, I'm going to hire somebody to kill me. So I went through, and this is a story I tell in my next book, The Homecoming Queen of Crazy Town, but I went through the entire process of finding a person, meeting up with this person. And, this person didn't know that I wanted him to kill me. His first words to me was, "Who pissed you off and what do you want me to do about it?" Mm. And so like that, I think is just indicative of how difficult the journey is to get from the darkness to the light. But I do believe, and that's why, besides speaking and writing, I'm a supervisor on the National Suicide Hotline. And because I feel that responsibility to try to help other people who feel trapped in the darkness, I was ultimately able to escape. That's work that's very, very important to me. And, even in the 12 steps, we're required or we're supposed to share. Mm-hmm. If we've learned something, then we're supposed to give it back. And so my message always is, even as a therapist, I couldn't heal myself. And I needed to be able to speak that truth to someone. And I think that's the most powerful thing. I had a lady reach out to me after I spoke one time, and she said, "I've been married to my best friend for 30 years. She said, I've never told him or anyone else that I was sexually abused. And she said, I may never tell another soul, but I'm telling you." No. And she said, "At least it's off my shoulders now." And that was so powerful to me, because she didn't say, "I'm married to a fool and we don't sleep in the same room." She said, "I'm married to my very best friend." Right. And so this man is laying next to his wife for 35 years and has no idea what she went through as a child. And I just want people to know you can survive the healing process. And, here's the pain, here's healing, or here's peace, but the bridge that connects them is healing. But we can't heal what we don't acknowledge. And not acknowledging it almost killed me.
It took you a long time, from what you're saying, to get to the point where you were able to admit and address mm-hmm. the trauma and the abuse. I mm-hmm. mean, it took you a long time. and
it did.
You went through a lot. You were willing to give up a lot. Why do you think it was in that moment, in that office in Sedona with that therapist, that you decided to do it at that point?
She wore me down. I'd been there for days, and she was just as determined to be silent for as long as it took as I was to remain silent. And I felt at that point very protected in that environment. And additionally, I think that eventually, when pain is powerful enough, it's a catalyst to begin to accept that I can possibly speak this and survive it. Mm-hmm. And I think that process is what allows our brain to go from being hypervigilant to rest and repair. And, I saw that you had Dr. Perry on here, and of course, I loved his book with Oprah, What Happened to You. And I actually reached out and emailed him, and amazingly, he responded. I was just so thrilled by that. But understanding what trauma does to our brain and made it so clear, all the bad decisions, all the impulsivities, all the, low self-worth. And I think that as therapists, we have to remember that shame is so powerful. It will strangle the life out of people, mm-hmm. and people will not speak it. The National Association of Abused Adults Who Were Abused says that 95% of people who were sexually abused never speak it to anyone. And if you take the numbers, 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys, that says we have roughly 82 million adults, just in the United States, who've been sexually abused. And 95% of those people have never spoken of it to anyone. So we have all these people who are, you know, listening to people who say it was in your childhood, get over it.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have, or what kind of relationship do you have with your brothers now?
I don't have a relationship with my brothers. The one has since passed away. And in a strange enough event, he had cancer, and I was the one who had to take care of him.
Wow.
And on his deathbed. And so that's definitely a chapter of the Homecoming Queen of Crazy Town, because that was a very difficult week of my life. The other brother, there were two types of abuse. One was very savage and brutal and threatening, and the other one was talk you into it, like, but not being violent with me. And so I grew up thinking that wasn't abuse. And so I'd had a relationship with him my whole life. And I thought he was, you know, like one of my like good friends. I never considered that abuse because he didn't physically hurt me. And it wasn't until I went into treatment that I realized that abuse was every bit as damaging as the violent abuse. And so I don't have a relationship with him today.
Do you feel it's, I guess, how do you look at that? How do you view that? Do you think is forgiveness there? Does one need to forgive them in order to move forward?
Yeah.
And when I ask you that, I'm just asking you, I don't know, I don't have an answer. You know what I'm saying? I'm just curious about what your thoughts are on that topic.
Right. And absolutely. I mean, first of all, my faith is one of the big things that got me through this, my whole life, my entire life. I can see the handprints of God in every piece of my story. But forgiveness for me was so crucial. And I always understood in a strange way, I always understood that someone hurt them for them to hurt me. I somehow was always cognizant of that. And it didn't mean that I didn't go through times of hating and being very angry, but I always was aware someone hurt them first. And I knew for sure that the brother who wasn't violent had been hurt by my older brother. So in that regard, I always knew that had happened, and that gave me a little bit of, I guess, grace even before I had healed. But once I went through healing and therapy and treatment, I was able to completely forgive. And because I realized forgiveness doesn't mean I have to let you in my life. And, you know, forgiveness is for me, you know, because my pastor said to me one time, when you don't forgive somebody, it's like having a rat in your house, but you drink the poison. You're the one who's sick. And so letting go of that and finding forgiveness has been a big part of my healing journey as well. And something that sometimes I have to just continue to pray about and be like, I'm mad again today. So
right. Yeah, that's a tough one for me. I don't know if I could do that or would want to quote unquote forgive. You know, you mentioned letting go. I could see where, you know, I would feel an enormous amount of anger and oh my God, towards this person. And I would feel that weight in me and I would want to let that go. But yeah, forgiveness is a big one, man. It's how do you forgive someone, I guess, but you've got to move on somehow.
Right. That's what I meant when I said we aren't meant to be stuck in healing. Right. You know, you see people who it seems like they're stuck in one part of it, which is understandable. But I wanted to move forward out of that, take all the lessons I learned, because I never wanted to speak, even in You Have Such a Pretty Face, which, by the way, I named it that because people would say, oh, Kelley, you know, it's such a shame about your weight. You have such a pretty face. And it's not a compliment for anybody out there that thinks that is, because so many people have resonated with that title. But I was just able to move out of that and take all the lessons I'd learned, all the scars that I had, that I realized I no longer needed to hide, to be able to move forward into a place where I had happiness and joy and was able to exist outside of what has happened to me.
At what point did you get, when did you get to the point, Kelley, when you were like, I want to write this book?
Yeah. So after I came home from treatment, when I came home, eventually I thought, I'm going to share this story. The interesting thing is, and You Have Such a Pretty Face, the subtitle of that book is A Memoir of Trauma, Hope, and the Joy That Follows Survival. So while I do talk about my weight loss, it's about the trauma and how I talk about all the different addictions. I talk about how, losing the weight didn't fix things. And so, but that process in that book, I didn't mention the sexual abuse initially. And it was like I couldn't sleep at night. So I put a few paragraphs in there about it. But that, because I just wasn't to the point yet that I could share my story entirely with the world. And that's so many people. I've had thousands of messages from people who resonate with the homecoming queen of Crazy Town. And like I said, I mentioned her in the first book because they're like, girl, you might be the queen, but I'm dang sure on the court. Like people really resonate with her, that broken part of us that surfaces when we're stressed and overwhelmed and when we haven't healed. But there was one day that I was in a really, really dark place. And I was searching on YouTube for videos of someone who I could get some inspiration from and get some hope from. And I found somebody and I was listening to their story, and I kept watching the clock, and I'm like, when are we getting to the really good part, And so I'm like, she's out of time. And the thing was, someone had hurt her, and definitely she'd had a hard time and had a remarkable healing journey, but she hadn't made any mistakes along the way. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I want to hear from somebody who, because of all of the things that needed to heal in their brain, had a bunch of scars and had made mistakes and still had been able to heal and find their way out of it and move forward. And so it was on that day and You Have Such a Pretty Face was already out, but it was on that day that I just promised God, if you will give me the strength to heal and get through this, I'll speak, I'll tell my story. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I started to speak and not just sit in the corner of my room and write a blog.
Wow. Kelley, man, as we close down here, just so inspiring. I mean, you've got guts, girl. I mean, you're so courageous. Seriously, come on.
Thank
man.
You.
What's your mission, would you say? I mean, obviously you're on a mission.
I am on a mission.
What articulate it for me?
Yes, I want to speak basically from Maine to Spain. I want to let the world know, everybody who's suffering in silence, people who may never speak it to another person, that they are not alone, that there are millions of other people who have been through what they've been through, and that you can heal, that you are not worthless. You're not what's been done to you. You're not what's been said to you. You're not all the sorry, but bullshit lies that trauma likes to speak to your mind when you're feeling so low. And if I can make my way out of that darkness, so can you. And that is what I speak about every time I speak. And each time I speak, it's just amazing the line of people afterwards who just want to say, me too. I've had 85-year-old women say, I've never told anybody, but I'm telling you right now.
Oh my God.
And, men too, men line up and tears streaming down their face saying, God. Me too. And knowing that, because what I believe is that people who are in pain don't want to hear you should, or this is how you fix it. They want to hear, I've been there.
Right.
That's what they want to hear. They want to hear me too.
Right.
And obviously that's not the job of a therapist, but they need to hear that someone else has survived the unthinkable, and not just survived, but been able to heal and begin to thrive. And that's my mission. You know, regardless of what your beliefs are, whether you believe in God or the universe or a higher power, whatever your beliefs are, you can get through this and you can survive. And my life is perfect proof for my beliefs of what God can do with the broken. And that's what I want people to know. They can survive.
Kelley, how can people reach you?
My website is kelleygunter.com. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and probably my website is the best way to reach me. There's a contact us on there because I get a lot of messages on social media. Yeah, my website.
And the book can be purchased anywhere books are sold?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
We'll have that linked up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Kelley, love to have you back.
Thank you. I would be glad to come back.
Definitely. We'll do it at a later date. Man, so strong and inspiring you are. It was an honor having you on this podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll be in touch.
Okay.
All right. I want to thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and I want to let you know that I am very excited about my new podcast, The Right Now Project. The Right Now Project is about healing. It's about stepping into our own courage and authenticity and getting started or continuing along our healing process. We're all going through something, whatever it is, in this crazy life we're living. And the Right Now Project is about honoring that, celebrating that, and sharing our stories via the associated membership site. Check us out at therightnowproject.com, therightnowproject.com.